I'm actually first going to talk about Thomas Munford. He was with Confederate cavalry, and he is probably more well known than a lot of the commanders that we talk about, but I didn't know much about him, and I like cavalry, so I decided, I would just look into his story. He is actually born in Richmond, Virginia in 1831. His father will be in the government down there. He's actually going to be like the secretary for the Commonwealth of Virginia at one point in time. So Munford is actually, he goes to school in Richmond. He then goes to Virginia Military Institute in Lynchburg and graduates in 1852. He then works for the railroad for a period of time, but he likes farming. So he's going to take up farming. He and his younger brother will actually go down to Mississippi for a while and operate a plantation there. When his younger brother dies unexpectedly, he will come back to Virginia and he will take up farming. And then obviously he helps raise a regiment, which is originally the 30th Virginia in the Civil War, which literally after the Battle of First Manassas becomes, or part of the guys in the 30th Virginia will become the 2nd Virginia Cavalry, and that's what he will command, at least as a colonel, before the Battle of Antietam or the Maryland Campaign. So that's what he's doing, the latter part of August of 1862 before the Maryland Campaign starts. He will actually be a brigade commander in the Maryland Campaign. He takes over Robertson's brigade early on in September, and so he is with Stuart's cavalry. And if anybody looks into this, what Stuart is doing, he's actually acting as the rear guard for Lee's army. So he's screening the movement of Lee's troops. And then the Federal cavalry is the one that's advancing toward the Confederates. So you kind of have this, for the first few days of September, you literally have the Confederates screening the movement of the Union guys and the Union guys moving toward them. Again, we're talking about cavalry. So the Union is the advance elements. And so they're skirmishing, both the Federals and the Confederates in all capacities are skirmishing literally before the Battle of South Mountain. Munford will actually go down to Crampton's Gap. He will have a few troops there, his cavalry and some other troops, to defend Crampton's Gap. Obviously, that doesn't work out very well. Franklin's going to push them off of there late in the day of the 15th. So then Munford will actually come off of South Mountain to the west of there and wind up at ultimately down on the southern part of the battlefield here at Antietam. So when Munford is here at Antietam, he will actually be on what would be the right flank of the Confederate forces, and his cavalry guys will be down by the lower bridge, so Antietam Iron Works area. And which is kind of interesting, we don't talk about him, but the 6th New York Cavalry, which is under the command of Thomas Devon, they're down there keeping an eye on what Munford is doing. I think he's protecting the right flank of Lee's army. Lee needs several things, and the one thing he needs is access to the fords to get across the Potomac. Boatler's Ford, Packhorse Ford, the same place. Well, the Harper's Ferry Road and the road that goes through town now, Maryland Route 34, are actually also another road, the Miller Sawmill Road, are his access to that ford across the Potomac. So he has to have some mechanism to keep access to those. Well, if you're down at Antietam Iron Works, where the lower bridge below Antietam, below the Burnside Bridge, crosses the Antietam Creek, just upstream of the confluence of Antietam Creek and the Potomac, it's an important spot. And he will spend the whole day of the 17th down there. That's where he is the whole entire time. He's not really engaged in combat. I don't recall that he lost any men at all, but again, he's protecting what would be Lee's right flank. So after the battle, literally after the Battle of Antietam, Munford is going to go back into Virginia. He will alternate between being the colonel of the 2nd Virginia and be in brigade command until basically the end of the war. He will take over Fitzhugh Lee's brigade periodically. He will take over Wickham's division and Fitz Lee's division. So again, he's going to serve in that capacity, commanding either a brigade or a division in the Confederate cavalry almost to the end of the war. He is actually recommended numerous times for promotion to brigadier general, and that will never pan out. I'm not entirely sure why. Part of it, I think, is Stuart talks highly of him, but I don't know that Stuart really liked him. Even though he's a Virginian, he does not get necessarily the respect or the attention that some other Virginians get. Just before the Confederacy collapses, again, he will be recommended for promotion to brigadier general. It will go clear up to the chain of command. Robert E. Lee will recommend that go through. It is never approved by the Confederate Congress. So he will wind up the war even though he has been a brigade and division commander for a lot of it as a colonel. And I think he's actually pretty bitter about it. But even though after the war, everybody says he's a general, well, technically he's no such thing. But anyway. The other thing that's kind of interesting about him that I found out relatively recently, he's kind of an obscure guy and there's not a lot of information about him. But there were 12 kids in his family. His father had 2 different wives, so he is a son from the first wife. His oldest brother fought for the Confederate infantry, and then he had a younger brother from his father's second wife, so a half-brother actually, who was with the Confederate artillery, and I think was mortally wounded at Malvern Hill. So I just literally found this out subsequent to writing the article for the Commander series. He does not leave a lot of writings that I'm aware of. Again, I think there was some contention and bitterness there that he felt and others felt he deserved to be, a brigadier general or potentially a major general. Anyway, something above a colonel, and he was never promoted to those positions. So I think it caused harsh feelings. You don't see a lot about him. One thing someone else would have said about him was that, that he was a pretty good guy. He was brave, he was courageous, he was competent, but he was kind of gruff and, kind of mean sometimes. So you just don't pick up a whole bunch of information about him, even as an individual per se, except for those, few comments. And a lot of that actually came out of compiled service records. It's not out, in general circulation, but compiled service records are in the National Archives.